Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness podcast. My co-host Walter Dial is away at the beach, much deserved vacation time, so I'm flying solo here this morning. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building a transferable or sellable business, and then for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that is indeed transferable and then exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. As we've stated often during these podcasts over the last number of years, there's much at stake when an owner leaves their business, when they exit. Their financial future, of course, and security, and that of their family. The future of all stakeholders, which would include employees, customers, vendors, the owner's role and reputation in the local community and the local economy is at stake. Family and relational harmony is often at stake. And that's just a short list. And of course, the owner's goals, whatever they may be, in addition to what I just mentioned, for life after the business, all of it's at stake and more. And so with all of that meaningful list of things at stake, there are not a few psychological and emotional challenges that owners experience when thinking of eventually leaving the business. And these challenges can actually keep an owner from moving forward and doing what they know they need to do. They know they need to create a strategic plan for leaving eventually. But these emotional challenges can often hinder them from moving forward and creating that plan and then acting on it. And so our topic today, the psychological and emotional challenge of exit and succession. Today we're going to have, I'm excited to have back with us today, guest Dr. Elizabeth Carr and attorney Cherie Morris. They've been with us before. Elizabeth is the founder of Kentland Psychotherapy, which she launched in 2005 after serving 6 years as a Navy clinical psychologist. She continues to work with existing clients, but her role now has become, because her practice has grown, her role is mostly one of leadership, mentoring, administration, and supervision of her growing staff and team. And then Cherie is an attorney, conflict coach, transformational mediator, and she's a student of relationships. I think you'll see that here again today in our conversation. She has expertise in advising individuals and couples on communication and co-parenting, as well as helping families and small businesses resolve conflict. So, ladies, welcome back. Love having you. We had a great time the last time, and I'm expecting that to happen again today.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you so much, Pat.
Yeah, so the last time you were with us, we had this fun conversation. We discussed the TV series Succession. And you might remember the big question and challenge faced by Logan Roy at the time, who's the patriarch of the family and the guy that built and leads the company. His big question and challenge at the time was, which of these flawed individuals in my family should succeed me in controlling the company that I built from the ground floor? And now it's this multinational big conglomerate. And in our conversation, the three of us, and Corby was with us too, we discussed that, and then ongoing family saga that kept developing and going in all kinds of different directions, and some of the psychological and emotional considerations that you can glean from everything they're experienced that can be transferred to our listeners, business owners, smaller business owners, as they face similar challenges, emotional and psychological challenges. So So it only makes sense that today we start with, let's get started with your update on the Roy family and any thoughts, current thoughts and observations that you have that again can be transferable to our listeners. Does that make sense? Is a good place to start?
It sure does. And I would say the reason to bring in Succession, the TV series, is for all of the sort of bad examples it gives us, right, of what can happen in a family with all the resources in the world. And still, they haven't solved the fundamental question, because I think Logan Roy doesn't know and hasn't done the work himself of knowing what he wants. He's a complicated individual, or was, because spoiler alert, he dies in the final season, but he has not done the analysis himself because he's not sure what he wants next. And he also makes very clear throughout this final season that the way he measures love is about not just material possessions, but control of the business through his children. So I think he's very afraid that if he doesn't keep them on some sort of tether and hopeful that they may get something in the business, that they won't love him in the way he deserves. So even though he wouldn't have recognized that, I think, Pat, in a way that we would hope, I think that's very much mixed up in what happens in the show. And I think we see all the same dysfunction. The child with the addictive personality exhibits behaviors in line with that. The child who feels unloved exhibits behaviors in line with that. The child who feels unloved and has other behaviors in line with that exhibits those behaviors. So I think we see a repeat of earlier patterns, but most importantly, this is a family that could have done the work if they chose to. And I think it's important because Elizabeth and I were speaking recently, and she said, you know, most people in these situations don't need a lot of therapy to get this stuff fixed. Now, maybe the Roy family does, right? We'll say that. But in this instance, I think what really didn't happen was an understanding from Logan with his children about what's next and best. So that's what we're here to talk about, right? Why it matters to have intentional conversations about these matters before tragedy strikes, so that the relationships between siblings, for example, can continue in a healthy way, which would be a challenge, shall we say, if Succession were to have another season.
And if I can tag on a little bit on the end of that, you know, I really enjoy listening to your podcast whenever I have a chance. And one thing that I think Logan failed to do that you and your team talk about is, first of all, if you have someone that you're putting in line or that you're thinking about, that you have to see their strengths and boost them up and encourage them in their strong areas. And the other thing is that you have to give them power to start making decisions before you step out. And he really failed to do either one of those things. Dismally. And I think both of those are really important. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, Pat, about those two areas.
Yeah, well, it is critical. And we've actually recently added another practice area to our suite of services, and it is successor coaching. And it's much to do with this. But yeah, it's absolutely essential. Something that I think you both, or Cherie, you may have focused on this a little bit more, was Logan not knowing what he really wanted. How do you see that being? I mean, we think that's absolutely critical and foundational to everything. As a matter of fact, that's what we're all about. And you all are too in the work that you do, is we want to find out what the owner really wants and then help them put a plan in place to make it happen. But he must have wanted something. And frankly, I haven't watched much of the series.
Yeah.
He must have wanted something. What do you think he really wanted? Or that wasn't clearly articulated in a positive, productive way? So
interestingly, if I had Elizabeth's job, Dr. Carr's job, I'd probably say he wants to be loved fundamentally, right? Like, this is the heart of it all for all of us from a psychological perspective. And I do think that's true for Logan as well. But I think too, what he wanted was to have some of his identity still tied to this company.
Mhm.
And that, from my perspective as a coach, is critically important, because he didn't know how to let go a little bit, lift up, as Elizabeth said, the siblings that could have taken over while still maintaining an appropriate role. If he had articulated that strong drive, I don't want to feel redundant, useless, no longer needed, then certainly a role could have been developed in that capacity. Now, it's really hard for someone like Logan, that probably has a personality disorder and is very narcissistic, but for other people, it's not so hard. I don't know what I'll do when I leave this company, and I don't want to feel like I don't have a role at all and feel useless. So can we do something about that? And of course, the answer is yes. So from my perspective, Pat, the simple answer for Logan is, how can I stay involved in some capacity, be made to feel valued and important, and yet hand over to these reins to kids that I do love, that I do want to succeed me, and to have the company succeed.
Yeah, identity. So we talk a whole lot about that, because, I mean, it's completely understandable, isn't it? I mean, for a guy like that who built a company like that, it's got to be on some level part of who he sees himself as or identifies as. And that's no less true for the clients that we're working with, much smaller businesses, but they built it from the ground floor, and it's successful now. And I mean, Elizabeth, your business growing and
I can absolutely relate to that. I feel like
yeah,
we, myself and my team, have built something that is, I'm very proud of, and I want to be around forever. I want the business to be around longer than I'm around. So I find myself, even just in my mid-50s, thinking, what's my succession plan? Because I would like this business to be available as a resource to the community 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now. And I think that investment in part of your identity and wanting it to be there forever is part of it, right? It's part of it for, I think, all of us.
So Elizabeth, as the psychologist here among us, then how do we help an owner who even recognizes this? And because not a few of them do that we work with, and it just makes it hard for them to think about what's next. And sometimes the answer is, you know what? You don't have to leave completely. Right. You have some other things you want to do. You could be an absentee owner on some level. You can keep the business until you pass away if you want to. But they have these conflicts. They're conflicted a lot of times because there are other things. Maybe their spouse wants them to start to do more other things. But anyway, regarding this identity issue, Elizabeth, how do you get owners to, well, do you get them to move past it, or how do you get them to face that challenge?
Well, a couple of things. I really appreciate the emphasis that you all make about this idea that it doesn't have to be black and white. You own the business, you sell it tomorrow, you walk away, somebody else has complete control. There are gradations that are available. And that's absolutely something that I think about with my own business. How can I slowly put other people in place and slowly step back until I'm more in an advisory role? And that really, I think, is a salve for this question of identity, because I don't have to let go of my identity, and I could keep it even just with a finger in the pot, right? So I think that's really appealing. Of course, that's not an option for every business owner, but I think when it is an option, it's a very valid one and worth considering. The other part that I know you all talk about is, okay, when you're not working and when you're not in the business, what is your non-business identity? I think it really reminds me a lot of preparing to be an empty nester. Our son is leaving for college, in about a week and a half. And I have been thinking for a year now and planning and putting things into place for what is our robust, joyful, meaningful life look like without being active parents in the same role that we used to have before. And I think that letting go of your business is very much like letting go of your child when they leave for college, and a similar process has to happen.
Well, see, that's very wise. So yeah, here's one of the reasons that we're kind of bumping up. You guys listen to the podcast, you know that we talk a lot about getting started sooner rather than later
Yeah.
for planning to exit. And it has it has as much to do with what we're talking about here today as it does with any of the technical aspects or financial or tax. This piece here has as much importance, if not more so, because 75% or more of owners who leave within 1 year, they're miserable because of the things that we're talking about here. But if you take the time to start to cultivate other interests apart from the business, and this can take time, that can start to more pull you away from it rather than push you out of it, the chances of you being successful and peaceful and happy and when you actually leave are going to be greater because you found some things to cultivate that are going to replace that significance, meaning, purpose that you've experienced, like Logan Roy has as a business owner.
And if I may just add, Pat, to tag on to the wonderful things that you and Elizabeth said, I think it's so important as to note that as a lawyer, one of the reasons I shifted entirely to coaching is you can solve people's legal problems. You know, you mentioned it, we can handle all the logistics, but if we haven't handled the meaning of that, of all of that, of those problems, then probably the job hasn't been done. The solution hasn't been found. So I think it's a combination of careful and thoughtful planning and layering meaning and cultivating the interest. Let's make it intentional instead of an afterthought.
That right there is a key takeaway, listeners. Let's make it intentional rather than an afterthought. Too often it's an afterthought. Too often it's, you know, I can't wait to leave. I wanted to leave a year ago, and I'm going to go fishing or I'm going to go golfing. Well, let's say they do exit successfully from a financial perspective. In a year or so, it's not uncommon for them to, okay, I got to do something else than go fishing. I got to do something else and play golf, and they start to miss the purpose and meaning that was causing them a lot of headaches, you know, when they were in the midst of it. But then when it's gone, because they were having such influence and impact on all those people, all those stakeholders, when it's gone, they understand what it was really worth when they had it.
Absolutely. And I think that's really what we're here to talk about today. It's how do you create that shift in a way that has meaning for you, that has your partner or spouse not calling you or me saying, please get them out of here, they're driving me crazy. And has them feeling they're forward looking. And that also maintains, especially if we're talking succession as a family planning or exit as a family planning, you know, problem that maintains those familial relationships that can be so complicated, but not always so difficult if we are intentional about the discussions we have.
Yeah. So what kind of let's try to come up with 3 things. I'm sure you guys can come up with a whole list of things, but I like to try to stick to 3. That way it might stick. If you were going to present 3 ideas along the lines of what you were just talking about, Cherie, but to both of you, what would those 3 things be?
So I think the first idea I have is let's start the conversation. And my idea about starting a conversation means don't think you have to go it alone. Sometimes those conversations in families, especially, are weighted with meaning that we don't understand from the other person's perspective. So start a conversation and maybe consider making it a supported conversation, whether you seek out coaching or therapy. In general, again, Elizabeth and I were talking, most people don't need a lot of therapy to do this work, but they may need some coaching. What should we be talking about? So supported conversation would be my first idea.
I have a second idea, which would be, oftentimes in therapy, we talk about parts work. And I think in my own process, I think about because I have a very long landing strip with my own exit planning. I have a 10, 15-year landing strip with my exit planning. And I think, what are the best parts that I want to keep? What are the parts of running the business that I absolutely love and adore that I'm going to keep? And what are the worst parts that cause me headache and stress that I'd like to give to someone else? And to kind of dissect it in that way really has been helpful to me in beginning that slow, long process.
That's fantastic. Yeah, good. Okay, is there a third one?
I think the third one is layering these pieces together. So supported conversation in conjunction with ideas about what you want to keep and discard allows you to tell the people who may be your successor why they're important, to allow them to understand that they're stepping into a gap that's needed. And at the same time, you retain meaning and importance, they gather meaning and importance. So that intersection happens that we're looking for. Someone doesn't feel unloved or not valuable. So I think supported conversation, ideas about what you want to keep and discard, and then creating meaning from all of that, and then making the plan is the key. So if you're asking for the points of 3, I would say it's conversation. Would you call that explanation, Elizabeth, or how would you name that? Or analysis, really?
Yeah, I think that part 2 is discernment, but I really
Awesome.
love the third part that you talk about, which is validation, and not just validation for the choices that you're making for yourself, but also using it as an opportunity to really hold people up and to remind them of their value.
And it allows, I think, the people then to, I love that term validation, to integrate those pieces, right? So I don't know if we can have a fourth, Pat, but it can also be part of validation. But then to integrate all of that together is really the key.
That's fantastic advice right there. The supportive conversations, that's foundational to it all, right? Does that have to happen first? And that can be, and I want you to respond to this. That seems to be the toughest part, is to get started there. I'll give you an example. Okay, so we helped a local business, successful business, 2 partners, brothers. Okay, they came to us, they referred to us by bank. And we were just at a charity golf event with them the other day, and one of the brothers was just, he in a group, he went off and said, if it wasn't for these guys, and he pointed to he pointed to what we're talking about here today. Because we contacted them when they were first referred. They were all excited about getting going and putting a plan in place. But then we didn't hear from them for like, I don't know, number of months.
Yeah.
And I got back in touch, and what happened was these emotional challenges started to weigh, because they knew they were going to have these supportive conversations you just mentioned.
Yes.
And they knew it was foundational. They knew they needed to have it, but there was so much emotion packed into it that they didn't really want to get started on it, and they really didn't know how to, but we told them, well, we can help you with that. So any thoughts about just starting there and how tough it can be, and any advice on how to get those foundational supportive conversations going?
So one of the things I do when I work with a family system in particular is to make sure everyone feels heard. And that means, from my perspective, sometimes having separate meetings at the front end so I understand their perspective. It's a way to get things started, and to have them understand that maybe saying, I will only show up if she admits that she was always wrong, isn't the way that we're going to create progress. So in other words, I can spend that time understanding from their perspective what has happened and hold that meaning and perhaps even validate to some extent what has occurred. But then when we come together all together, we create what I call an agenda for success. So certainly people have the opportunity to say what doesn't work, but as Elizabeth so wisely noted, it's important to say what does work and to give that validation to people about what positive meaning they hold for them and what regard. So if we allow people the space and give them the opportunity to do some separate work, whether it's coaching or therapy, and also, Pat, what I heard you did is you held them gently accountable. I know you want to do this. Let's go. Let's get into it. Let's do it. And so I think people do need those gentle reminders. It's really easy just not to do it. So from my perspective as a coach, just getting them to show up is a great first place to start.
And I think sometimes when there's a difficult conversation that needs to happen, people often feel that they need to do some personal, internal soul searching first. But if they do that on their own, for all of us, it's so easy to get in our own thought loop where we're just going in circles and we're not making any progress. And that's the benefit of talking to an objective outside person. So it helps us get out of that loop cycle in our thinking.
Yeah, well, that's exactly, he may not have used that same terminology, but that's basically what he said we help them do.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. When they talked about how we help them get a plan in place, they didn't talk at all about really all the logistical, practical, technical stuff. And it wasn't a little bit of that. The emphasis was this, because this was the hardest part for them to move forward in. And we've come to more realize that I think a lot of owners put this very, very important planning off because of the emotional stuff can be really the hardest part.
Absolutely. And sometimes you have a skill set that allows you to be incredibly successful in business that may not integrate some of these emotional skills. Not surprising to anyone. Many people have, all of them, but not everyone does. So if there's something to be avoided, it can be that, but then it doesn't help when you're trying to create this exit or succession planning. So the prompts, I think, create really good opportunities for people to get in there and do the work. And Pat, when you said that about, they don't talk about the planning, the logistics we did, which was no small thing, right? I'm sure that was a lot, but that's my experience. It's not the legal piece, right? It's the emotional, the relationship piece, the integrating who people are with who they want to be and maintaining and enriching these relationships.
And the thing that I find that's amazing about these conversations, and I think for all three of us, when we're doing it well with people, we're being humble, we're being curious, and we're asking them to articulate things so clearly and at a granular level so that we can understand. And that process in and of itself is very clarifying for people. Oftentimes in therapy, that's what I'm doing with people, is just being curious, just asking questions. And that process of them trying to explain it to me, they have these epiphanies, right? And I think that probably happens for all three of us when we're working with people.
Well, that's a great point. Thanks for mentioning that, Elizabeth, about humility, because it took humility for this gentleman or these two gentlemen to say, you know what, we're having a real hard time just with the emotional stuff. We at the time, they really didn't know us real well. We came highly recommended to them, but they didn't really know us, and we were getting to know each other. And so that took a level of humility, of course, and also courage, just to tell Corby, my partner, and I, you know what, we're having some emotional challenges with this.
Yes.
It took some courage and humility, doesn't it?
And I think thinking about letting go of your business is a loss for people, and that if we can treat it as such, it opens up a space for people to talk about that in the morning that I think has to happen for some people.
Well, as expected, this has been a phenomenal conversation. It always is talking. I love talking to you ladies. I love this stuff and really enjoy it. And you two are at the top of the food chain when it comes to these issues. So it's always fun. Supportive conversations. Let's show up and get them done, listeners, and get help if you needed to get out of your personal loop in regard to your own thoughts. It's almost always helpful to get an objective third party involved when it comes to these kind of conversations. Then, an assessment of, in regard to leaving, what parts do I want to keep and what do I want to let go? That's very helpful process to go through. You might find that there's so much that you want to keep that you actually want to keep the business for as long as you live. And that's one of the things about, we're agnostic as to what route you choose. And then make sure that you're communicating with your potential successors in an appropriate, wise, intentional way, and in a way that validates their importance to the company and even probably your personal plans, and creating meaning from all of that with validation. Any other closing thoughts, ladies, that you haven't shared that should be shared that we haven't brought up?
It may seem daunting, right, to take this on, but really it's a step at a time. And Pat, you know that better than anyone because you do this all day long with clients. And I would just like to conclude by saying never miss an opportunity to remind someone of their value, right? None of us knows what tomorrow brings in our businesses, in our personal lives. But the idea that you're creating value in a relationship by reminding someone of who they are to you and what value they add if there is a company involved is a really easy thing to do, much easier, especially once you start practicing it. And that's the tool and tip I often give my clients, which is practice that sort of validation and see how it works out. And I think you'll find relationships can improve just based on doing that.
Excellent. Elizabeth, how about you?
I would just say it's never too early, really, to start exit planning. And when you do that, in my experience, you enjoy being in the business more as you're working on the business. And you create a stronger business that will eventually be more sellable so that you can have that life that you want to enjoy as the second chapter of your life.
Elizabeth, that was fantastic. You sound like my website.
Well, I think you guys have some fantastic stuff to say to people. It's
and
so
you
helpful.
Sound like a happy client, by the way.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that, you guys have really helped me to strengthen my business and to enjoy working in it and on it. And it's been phenomenal. And I just think that unfortunately, I suspect people think about seeking out someone like you for exit planning at way too late, the way people reach out for hospice way too late. And these are resources that we can do much, much sooner with all sorts of unexpected benefits.
Yeah, the earlier the better for a lot of reasons. We talk about it a lot. You guys are great. Going to have you back, of course, regular, because we can't talk about this too much, really, because it's continual, it's constant. And folks, owners need continual encouragement in all that we were talking about today. So thank you again. Is there anything that either one of you wants to promote today? Anything at all? Is there anything you want to promote? And then too, share your, if you'd like to be if listeners are okay to contact you, if you want to share your contacts. So anything you want to promote and contact information.
So it's my privilege to be part of the Kentland Psychotherapy Group. And there is a separate website called Recompose.us. Recompose Us. Take a look. noodle around. I'm here to help you talk about issues in your small business with family members, repair relationships. I always do a discovery session for about 20 minutes. It's super easy to schedule. We'll see each other on Zoom and let's talk and figure out if there's a good intersection for what you need and what I offer.
Excellent.
Absolutely. And as Cherie said, I think she's the best starting place for 90% of the people that you work with that need some extra help in these conversations. And if some folks need some more personalized soul searching or think that there's a psychological component that needs to be addressed, they can reach out to us at Kentland's Psychotherapy, and happy to see if we have some resources that can be of support to them in their process.
Thank you, ladies. I appreciate it so much. Listeners and listeners, if you want help in maximizing the value of your business or planning for that eventual exit, please get started sooner rather than later. You can reach Walter, who's not here with me today. He's got plenty of sunscreen on, hopefully on the beach. 301-951-9090 and me at 301-859-0860. You can also access resources at exitreadiness.com, grfcpa.com, and nslp.com. Thank you for listening. And until next time on the Exit Readiness podcast, this is Pat Ennis signing off.